Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. Today is day 6. As announced before, in 8 lectures, our endeavor is to complete all the important chapters of this book, Indian Constitution at Work, which is a textbook in political science for class 11th. We have covered 5 lectures previously. Today is lecture number 6, and we will have an interesting understanding of judiciary. So let's get started and let's understand why do we need an independent judiciary. In a democracy, listen to chapter number 1 discussion again. And I told you that in a particular society, there may be a large set of people who will be diverse. And this diverse set of people, it is always possible that there will be disputes. And there has to be an independent authority which should be tasked with resolving these disputes so that there is no one group which can dominate other groups. And judiciary operates and enforces something called rule of law. This is a doctrine which has been crystallized by British constitutional expert A.V. Dicey. And according to this rule of law, we say nobody shall be sentenced in body or goods except for a breach of law. Somebody's life should not be snatched. Somebody's property should not be snatched unless and until that individual has violated the law of the land. In Indian Constitution, we say that there is a corollary of rule of law known as equality before law. And in this equality before law, one concept that you need to keep in mind, equality before law would mean that anybody can sue or be sued. Equality before law would mean that this law shall be equally applicable to all the sections of the society. Nobody is above the law. All the citizens shall be subjected to the common law of the land. Long story short, why do we need an independent judiciary? Because in a diverse society, or for that matter in any society, there is every likelihood of a dispute amongst different sections of the society, different groups. How do we ensure that there is no one group which dominates the other? For that we need an institution which is independent and which will uphold rule of law, which will ensure that no one group dominates the other, which will ensure that all the citizens are subjected to the same equal law. And for that, judiciary plays that important role. But now we need to understand, what do we mean by this independence of judiciary? There are 3 things mentioned in NCERT, but I will go beyond NCERT concepts as well to make you understand what is this independence of judiciary. NCERT tells us independence of judiciary would mean if there are 3 organs of the state: legislature, which we discussed yesterday, executive, which we discussed day before, and judiciary. If there are 3 organs of the state, each organ will have its own area of influence. Judiciary should not be influenced by the executive or the legislature, which means the other organs of the state, which means other organs of the state must not restrain the functioning of the judiciary in such a manner that it is unable to give justice, unable to do justice. And as I told you, there should not be the dominance of one group over the other. What if other organs of the state will influence the judiciary that you should give precedence to the rights of one group as against the other? That means you are basically doing what? You are restraining the functioning of the judiciary in such a manner that it is unable to do justice. we should not ensure this, and for that, this is what we call independence of judiciary. Independence of judiciary would mean other organs of the government, like the executive and the judiciary, should not restrain the functioning of the judiciary in such a manner that it is unable to do justice. Second, it should not interfere with the decision of the judiciary. Whatever judiciary says, that should be the final verdict on that particular matter. Often, you might have heard of this phrase, Supreme Court is final, not because it is right, Supreme Court is right because it is final. What does that mean? You and me have a dispute, and I tell you, I will see you in court, because we trust judiciary, that this is an impartial institution which will give justice to me, because I think I have been wronged by you, my rights have been snatched by you, my property has been confiscated by you. I tell you, I will see you in court because we trust this institution of judiciary, that this is the institution which is capable of granting justice. There has to be an institution which will have a final word on a particular dispute. After that, the dispute comes to an end. For example, there was a dispute on the 2.77 acres of land at Ayodhya, on which Babri Masjid once stood. Muslims claimed that this is our land. Hindus claimed that this is the land which belongs to Lord Ram, where Lord Ram was born. Ultimately, matter went to the court, and Supreme Court in 2019 gave a verdict, and Supreme Court said, this is the land which belongs to Lord Ram. Some of the people criticized this judgment. But even after criticizing this judgment, they had to agree with this. They have to abide by this. Why? Because Supreme Court may not always be right, but it is the final authority to decide a particular matter. So we say Supreme Court is final, not because it can always be right, but Supreme Court is right because it is final, because there is no other authority above Supreme Court for granting justice. And no institution should interfere with the delivery of the justice. Once the court has said that this 2.77 acres of land belongs to Lord Ram, no other institution should be capable of interfering with the decision of the judiciary. And the third important concept of independence of judiciary, as mentioned in NCERT, is that judges should be capable to give justice, to give judgments without any fear, without any favor. These are the three concepts. That's what we call independence of judiciary. But I will go beyond NCERT and I'll tell you something different, a different interpretation of what is independence of judiciary. Independence of judiciary, number one, it does not only mean that judiciary should not be influenced by other organs of the state, that no other organ should interfere with the justice given by the courts. It does not only mean that judges should be capable of granting justice without any fear or favor. Independence of judiciary would also mean that judges should be free of their own biases while granting justice. What does that mean? Listen to me carefully. For example, I am a judge, but I am homophobic. I don't like members belonging to LGBTQIA plus category. For example, I am not like that. I am just giving an example. Assume that I am a judge, but I don't like members belonging to LGBTQIA plus category. But if a case comes before me where there is a member of this community who has been wronged, whose rights have been violated, whose dignity has been snatched, even if my ideology, my personal bias is against this community member, but that should not come in the way of granting justice. I should interpret the law as it is and give justice to the member of this LGBTQ community. That means we should not only look at the independence of judiciary in such a manner that other organs should not be in a position to influence the judges, but the other organs, keep them aside. These judges are also part of the society. They are from you and me. And all the people that we have, they have their own biases, likes and preferences. Those likes and preferences, those biases, whether political bias, religious bias, caste bias, any bias, should not come in between. You should be able to keep your personal biases aside and grant justice to an individual regardless of what your bias is. Independence of judiciary would also mean that judges should not only be independent of the influence of the executive and the legislature. Judges should be free from the influence of media or public perception. There is trial by media. Even when an individual is arrested, although the golden rule of the criminal justice system is you are innocent until proven otherwise. You are innocent until proven guilty. But there is the chief priest of the nation who goes at 9 o'clock every night and says the nation wants to know when this person would be hanged. So trial by media goes against rule of law. And for that we need judges who are able to withstand this media pressure and impartially decide a particular case based on its merits rather than what is the popular sentiment in the society. Because you have to give justice even if it goes against the public sentiment. That is what we call independence of judiciary. But independence of judiciary does not mean that these judges should then not be held accountable. That they should be independent to decide their own cases, to run their own institution, and there should be no checks and balances on this institution called judiciary. No, we have to hold judges accountable as well. And NCERT tells us that these judges are accountable to the Constitution. These judges are accountable to the democratic tradition that we have in India. These judges are accountable to the people of the country. But although these are important terms, independence of judiciary, important features, how does the Constitution ensure that judiciary is independent? For that we need to understand appointment of judges. And in appointment of judges, legislature is not involved. Because if legislature gets involved in appointing the judges, in legislature we have discussed yesterday that there are various political parties who would have won the election and ultimately they have captured Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. Then there will be political pressure. One party will want their own set of people to be part of the judiciary. The other party will want to have its own set of people as part of the judiciary. So ultimately what it will lead to? It will lead to politics in the appointment of judges. That is why Constitution ensures independence of judiciary. One, by keeping legislature away from appointment process. And I'll tell you later how these judges are appointed, but first thing that you have to keep in mind that legislature has been kept aside by the Constitution when it comes to the appointment of judges. And these judges, once they are appointed, they hold office during a fixed term. The judges of the Supreme Court, they do not hold office during the pleasure of the President. And that is something that we call doctrine of pleasure. What is this doctrine of pleasure? As long as the President is satisfied with you, you will continue to remain in office. The moment the President is not satisfied, he can remove you. And the President will have the power to remove you based on the recommendation of the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers. That is what we call doctrine of pleasure. For example, Attorney General for India. For example, the ministers at the union level. They hold office during the pleasure of the president. And now this doctrine acts like a Damocles sword on top of the head of these individuals. They have to constantly ensure that they are pleasing the political masters. And the moment they do something different, even if it is in favor of the constitution, even if it is constitutional, but not acceptable to the president, which means not acceptable to the prime minister, you will be removed. Constitution envisaged, the Constituent Assembly, the makers of the Constitution, envisaged such a conflict and said that these judges of the Supreme Court and High Court, they will remain in office till a retirement age. They will not be subject to this doctrine of pleasure. The judges of the Supreme Court will hold office till the age of 65. The judges of the High Courts will hold office till the age of 62. There is no concept of doctrine of pleasure. That's how we can ensure independence of the judiciary. They remain in office for a fixed term. But they can be removed even before they complete their term. And I will explain that process as well. But it is such a difficult process that till date, no judge of the Supreme Court and High Court has ever been removed from his office. How does Constitution ensure that judges retain their independence? They are financially independent. They are not financially dependent upon the legislature. Yesterday, when we discussed legislature, I told you that one of the functions of the legislature is a financial function. That means the money that is there in the Consolidated Fund of India, without parliamentary approval, this money cannot be withdrawn from the Consolidated Fund of India. That means from this Consolidated Fund, we need salary for the judges as well. If every time we need parliamentary approval to withdraw money from Consolidated Fund of India to give this as part of the salary to the judges, then how will judges be independent? Maybe the legislature will tell them, will give them a signal to the judges that you give us a favorable verdict and we will release your salary. Otherwise, your salary is stopped. One way of ensuring independence of judiciary, Constitution says that the salary of the judges is charged on the Consolidated Fund of India. Charged on the Consolidated Fund of India means once the salary is decided, without parliamentary approval, money will come from Consolidated Fund of India and will be given to judges as salary. So it is like you have a credit card and then you are also the subscriber of Airtel. Every month there is an auto debit facility that as soon as the bill comes, your account will be debited by 600, 700 rupees. That is part of your monthly package. Analogy, just to make you understand. This is closest that we can come to explaining the salary of the judges. Once that salary is decided by the parliament, then every year you don't have to seek parliamentary approval to withdraw salary from Consolidated Fund of India. This is to ensure independence of the judges. And how do we ensure independence of judges? Can you tomorrow say that this judge gave this verdict because this judge belongs to the upper caste? Or this judge gave this judgment because this judge belongs to a particular religion? Or has taken money from a political party? Or has taken money from a corporate house? No. Why? Because this amounts to contempt of the court. Yes, you can criticize the judges, their judgments, but you can't go personal. Criticize the judgments on their merits. Say, I don't agree with your judgment. Say, these are the points on which I disagree with your judgment. Disagreement is health. But you can't attribute personal motives to the judges. You can't scandalize the judge. You can't scandalize the institution of judiciary. And if you do that, you will be booked for contempt of court. How Constitution ensures independence of judiciary? Judiciary has the power to punish you for its contempt. And judiciary is ensured independence and assured independence because their conduct, the conduct of the judges cannot be discussed even in the parliament. I told you yesterday when we discussed legislature that there is a privilege for every legislator. You can discuss anything. You can discuss whatever you want to discuss, except one. You cannot discuss the conduct of judges inside the parliament. Unless and until you want to remove a particular judge, and for that obviously you have to criticize the conduct of that judge, otherwise why are you going to remove him? But without that, there is no power available to a legislator to discuss the conduct of judges inside the legislature. So long story short, why do we need an independent judiciary? To uphold rule of law, to uphold the constitution, to ensure that there is no one group which dominates the other groups. Because in a vast country such as India, it is every possibility is there that there is a likelihood of conflicts, disputes amongst different sections of the society. Not just amongst different sections of the society, we will have dispute against the state. And for that, we need an independent institution which is capable of ensuring justice. And what is this independence of judiciary? These 3 points and the 2 points I mentioned here. How does the Constitution ensure independence of judiciary? Legislature will have no role in appointing judges. Judges will not hold office during the pleasure of the president. Judges will hold office till a specific retirement age. Even before that age, they may be removed. But such is the difficult, complicated process of removal that till date, no judge of the Supreme Court and High Court has ever been removed. The salary of the judges is charged on the Consolidated Fund of India. Their conduct cannot be discussed inside the parliament unless and until you want to remove a judge. Then you can discuss the conduct of that particular judge. And judiciary has the power to punish those who commit contempt of the court, who willfully disobey the court, who scandalize the court. This is how Constitution ensures independence of the judiciary. But now the point is, how does the Constitution talk about the appointment of judges? And this has been a topic of controversy since so many decades now. First, how is the Chief Justice of India appointed? There has been an unwritten rule that the senior most judge of the Supreme Court should be appointed as the Chief Justice of India by the President. Now, who appoints the judges? Not the legislature, but the executive. Sir, then how can we ensure independence of judiciary? You said judiciary should be independent of the influence of executive and legislature. Then how do we ensure independence of judiciary when executive is appointing judges? I'll come to that point, but slightly later. Or let me come to that point now. Dr. Ambedkar, he said the most important office under the Constitution of India is that of the CAG, Comptroller and the Auditor General. And the next most important office is the office of a judge. And judges should be independent. They should be able to discharge justice without any fear, without any favor. But independence of judiciary should not mean that judges will appoint themselves. Independence of judiciary does not mean that judges should not be accountable. There has to be checks and balances. 3 organs of the government will have their own roles, own responsibilities, own functions. And no other organ will interfere in each other's roles, responsibilities and functions. But even then, one organ should be in a position to keep a check on the other organ so that this organ does not exceed its powers. Sir, what are you trying to say? If the job of the legislature is to make law, what if tomorrow legislature makes a bad law, an unfair law, an unjust law? Should we just sit back and relax and do nothing about this? Shouldn't there be another institution which can keep a check on the legislature that no, this is not your power. Yes, your power is to make law, but according to the constitution. You cannot violate the constitution. And if you violate the constitution, I will strike down your law. And who am I? I am the Supreme Court. Similarly, judges should be in a position to give justice. But what if judges themselves are not granting justice? What if judges themselves are biased? What if judges themselves are committing misbehavior? Shouldn't there be another institution which should be capable of removing that judge? That is what we call checks and balances. And Dr. Ambedkar said, how can we keep a check on the judiciary? Through appointments and removal. Judges will be appointed by executive. Judges will be removed by, tell me, executive. But based on the resolution, or should we say the approval of legislature. One organ will appoint, the other organ bases the resolution of this organ, executive will remove you. This is how we can keep a check on the judiciary. And how do we ensure independence of judiciary? Even when the executive is appointing judges, Chief Justice of India shall be consulted. So that you are consulting the Chief Justice of India, so that it is not going to be an independent decision, independent power of the executive that they can appoint anybody. They have to appoint after consultation with the Chief Justice of India. But who is this Chief Justice of India going to be? For that there was a convention, an unwritten rule that the senior most judge of the Supreme Court should be appointed as the Chief Justice of India by the executive, which is the President. Senior most judge, not in terms of age, in terms of experience. Experience in the sense, if my age is 50, well, that's not my age, I am older than that. But just to make you understand, if my age is 50 and I am appointed as the Supreme Court judge today, and your age is 60, and you are appointed as the judge of the Supreme Court tomorrow, both of us will remain in office till the age of 65. What if after some time there is this vacancy in the office of the Chief Justice of India? The current Chief Justice of India is retiring. Now we have to appoint the next Chief Justice of India. Who is this next Chief Justice of India going to be? The senior most judge. And out of the two of us, who is the senior most judge? You in terms of age, but me in terms of experience at the Supreme Court, because I was appointed to Supreme Court earlier than you, even if it is just for a day. So the consensus was, the convention was, the unwritten rule was that the senior most judge of the Supreme Court should be appointed as the Chief Justice of India. And then after consulting this Chief Justice of India, other judges of the Supreme Court, other judges of the High Court shall be appointed by the President. But this convention was broken. The year was 1973. Keshavananda Bharati judgment was given. Justice Sikri was the Chief Justice of India. He retired on the 24th of April, 1973. Then, according to this convention, the senior most judge should have been appointed. But senior most judge was not appointed. Instead, Justice A.N. Ray was appointed as the Chief Justice of India by the President on the advice of the Prime Minister. And in terms of seniority, Justice A.N. Ray was at serial number 4. There were 3 other judges who were senior to him, but they were not appointed. One of them was not appointed. Justice A.N. Ray was appointed. And what these 3 other judges did, they resigned in protest. But why was Justice A.N. Ray appointed? At that time, the slogan of the then government was committed judiciary. We should have judges who should be committed to the ideology of the political party in power, so that the ideology of the ruling party and the ideology of the judges should not be different. Judges and executive should come together for socialism, for social justice, for welfare. Something else happened in 1975 when Justice Khanna was supposed. It should have been 1976. Justice Khanna should have been appointed as the Chief Justice of India because he was the senior most judge of the Supreme Court, but he was overlooked. And Justice Beg was appointed as the Chief Justice of India. Why? Because Justice Khanna was independent in his outlook. He gave a dissenting judgment. When emergency was imposed, a law was passed called MISA, Maintenance of Internal Security Act, under which opposition leaders, trade union leaders, student leaders, activists were arrested. And the law said that you can't even approach the court. Habeas corpus is suspended during emergency. Matter went to the court. Whether during emergency habeas corpus should be suspended or not. 5 judges had to decide. 4 judges said, yes, Parliament is right. 1 judge dissented, Justice Khanna. He was all set to be appointed as the Chief Justice of India because of his seniority, but he was overlooked. Then don't you think that if executive has the complete say in appointment of judges, then they will invariably pick judges who share ideology with them, who they can influence or who can be influenced. This is where then in 1993 and then again in 1998, 2 important judgments of the Supreme Court which said that now President can appoint judges, but after consulting Chief Justice of India plus 4 senior judges of the Supreme Court. And this is what we call collegium system. Because previously it was only consultation. What is consultation? Now the court is saying in 1993 and 1998 that it is not consultation, it is concurrence. What does that mean? If I am asking a question right now, my dear students, am I going too fast in teaching? Should I go slow? And if all of you will say, sir, yes sir, you are going fast, please slow down, you know what I will do? I will go faster. Because I was only consulting you. That doesn't mean whatever you are going to tell me, that's binding on me. But if it is concurrence, and I am asking you, am I going fast? Should I slow down? If you say, yes, you have to slow down, I have to, I can't go fast. Because this is concurrence. Your advice is binding on me. Previously, it was only consultation. But Supreme Court said, we are the final interpreter of the Constitution. And we will interpret this English word as well. This term consultation means concurrence. That means whatever Chief Justice of India will advise you, only that name you have to appoint. You cannot appoint anyone else. Which means now, previously executive had complete control over who the judges can be. Now it is judiciary which has the control, making India the only country in the world where judges are appointed by themselves. Supreme Court further said, when the Constitution says Chief Justice shall be consulted, but who is the final interpreter of the Constitution? Supreme Court. We are saying you don't have to consult only the Chief Justice of India. Chief Justice of India is not only an individual. Chief Justice of India is an institution. And in order to consult CJI, which is an institution, you can't just consult individual CJI. You have to consult 4 senior judges of the Supreme Court as well. And together it will be called collegium. And whatever recommendation is given by this collegium, that's binding on the President. This is how the judges are appointed now. Collegium recommends names to the President, which is binding on the president, and ultimately judges are appointed by themselves. This is what is mentioned in NCERT. But if you go beyond NCERT, then there are so many issues, so many concerns you will have to look at. You will have to criticize collegium system. Then collegium system was sought to be replaced by another system called NJAC. But that, when it was passed by Parliament, it was struck down by the courts. But since that is not mentioned in NCERT, we will skip it because these are only basics that we are covering. Just the foundational clarity for you. Clear? So, judges are appointed by the President after consultation with the Collegium, which is Chief Justice of India and 4 senior judges. And whatever recommendation they give, that is binding on the President. This is how the judges are appointed. Now, I have also told you that checks and balances would tell us that appointment and removal, this is how we can keep a check on the judiciary. And how can we remove the judges? Extremely difficult process. First, you need to understand on what grounds can you remove a judge. Judge can be removed on the grounds of misbehavior and incapacity. Incapacity in the sense, I appointed you as a judge. Clear? And you were in your perfect mental state. But something happened and now you lost your mental balance. I'll have sympathy with you, but I cannot entrust you with the responsibility of granting justice to others because you will not be in a position, in a capacity to do justice. And if this happens, I can remove you. Similarly, if you have indulged in misbehavior, misbehavior can be any form. Corruption is also a misbehavior. And on these two grounds, grounds of misbehavior and incapacity, the judges can be removed. But by whom? A motion has to be introduced in the Parliament. That means parliamentarians will initiate this process. And in both houses of the Parliament, if this motion is passed by special majority. And what is the special majority? More than 2/3 of the members present and voting plus majority of the total membership of the House. Which is very difficult to achieve. And if both houses of the Parliament pass this motion by this special majority, then it will be sent to the President. President will have to sign this removal. And then the judges will be removed. But till date, no judge has been removed from his office. NCERT says, so far only one case of removal of the judge of the Supreme Court has come up before the Parliament, which is correct as well as incorrect. Correct in the sense that when it comes to the judge of the Supreme Court, this is the only case. But there has been judge of the High Courts as well. At least 2. And in one instance, there has been a Chief Justice of India as well. For example, the first attempt was in 1991 when Justice V. Ramaswamy, who was the judge of the Supreme Court, but before that he was the Chief Justice of the Punjab and Haryana High Court. It was alleged that he had misused the money, the official money, and had used that money to refurbish his private home, private residence. Misbehavior, which I told you can be corruption as well. But how can we remove this judge? For that, both houses of the Parliament has to pass a resolution by special majority. When this matter was taken up, Congress party abstained. Congress party did not vote. When Congress party did not vote, that means you could not get the majority. And ultimately what happened? The motion got defeated Justice V. Ramaswamy continued. In another instance, against Chief Justice of India Deepak Misra, there were some allegations. We don't have to go too deep into those allegations now, but there were allegations against the Chief Justice of India, Justice Deepak Misra as well. Opposition introduced a motion asking, because this motion can be introduced in either Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha. The opposition introduced or tried to introduce a motion in Rajya Sabha, but the chairperson of the Rajya Sabha did not even accept this motion. Said, no, we will not accept this. So proceedings against V. Ramaswamy started, but it could not be completed because majority could not be achieved while voting. But proceedings against Chief Justice of India, Justice Deepak Misra, could not be even initiated. Although opposition MPs, they tried to raise this matter, because the speaker, the chairperson of the Rajya Sabha, did not agree with this, did not accept this motion. In another instance, there was Justice Sumitra Sen of the Calcutta High Court. Again, allegations of corruption against him. And he was all set to be removed because Rajya Sabha passed a resolution. But then when this motion was to be taken up in Lok Sabha, Justice Sumitra Sen resigned because he did not want to enter the history books as the first judge, or perhaps the only judge, who was removed on the basis of the resolution of the parliament. So before his matter could be taken up by the Lok Sabha, he resigned. This is how the judges are removed. Now we need to understand what is the structure of the judiciary. We have an integrated judiciary. Integrated judiciary in the sense, look at United States. Every state has its own Supreme Court. And normally if there is a case in Chicago, local courts will first take this matter, then it will go all the way to the Supreme Court of Chicago, and the matter will end there. They have a federal Supreme Court as well, but that federal Supreme Court only takes up federal cases. Federal cases in the sense, if there is a dispute between the central government and a state, if there is a dispute between Chicago and Michigan, 2 or more states, only those cases, federal cases, and some important constitutional cases are taken up by the federal Supreme Court. Something is mentioned in NCERT which might give you a misleading understanding. It says India does not have separate state courts. And then you will ask me, sir, but we do have high courts. NCERT assumes, or it is the assumption here is NCERT is saying that unlike United States, where they have, every state has its own Supreme Court, that's not the system in India. Because in India, we have an integrated judiciary. Integrated judiciary in the sense, we have Supreme Court at the top, followed by High Court for every state. Then for every district, we will have a district court. Then within a district, there can be subordinate courts as well. Subordinate court takes up civil cases, criminal cases. But if you are not happy with these verdicts, you can file an appeal before the district court. If you are not happy with the verdict of the district court, you can go to the High Court of that state. If you are not happy with that verdict, you can approach the Supreme Court, which can't happen in United States. Because for every state, there is a Supreme Court. And all these cases end at the Supreme Court of that state. But in India, we have this integrated judiciary. Supreme Court at the top, then the High Court, then District Court, then subordinate courts. And NCERT focuses on the Supreme Court. And let's focus here on the Supreme Court, and we will discuss the jurisdiction or the power of the judiciary. First is original jurisdiction. What do we mean by original jurisdiction? Although not mentioned here in great detail, but I will make you understand. There is something called original and exclusive jurisdiction. What is original jurisdiction? Listen to me carefully. Didn't I tell you that if you're not happy with the decision given by the subordinate court, you can file a review with the High Court? If you're not satisfied with the decision of the High Court, you can file a review before the Supreme Court, right? So basically, Supreme Court is doing what? Hearing appeals. You're not happy with the High Court order? File an appeal before the Supreme Court. So Supreme Court is not hearing this matter for the first time. Supreme Court is not hearing this matter directly. Supreme Court is hearing this matter because it has come through the route of High Court. But there are some cases which you can directly file in the Supreme Court. Directly file in the Supreme Court. And all those cases on which the Supreme Court can directly accept cases, we say that Supreme Court has the original jurisdiction on that case. But then there is something called exclusive jurisdiction. If only Supreme Court can hear this case and no other court can determine that case. If this particular case can be directly taken up by the Supreme Court and no other court has the jurisdiction to take such a case, that's what we call exclusive jurisdiction. For example, if your fundamental rights are violated, we have discussed that in the rights in the Indian Constitution chapter. If your rights have been violated, what is the option available with you? What is the alternative available to you? You will knock the doors of the Supreme Court. Supreme Court will issue various writs. And which are those writs? Habeas corpus, mandamus, certiorari, prohibition, quo warranto. And through these writs, the courts will protect your fundamental rights. That means you are directly approaching the Supreme Court. That means when it comes to fundamental rights violation cases, Supreme Court has what type of jurisdiction? Original. Because this case can be directly filed in the Supreme Court. You don't have to go to the subordinate court, then district court, then high court, then all the way to the Supreme Court. You can directly go to the Supreme Court. So on fundamental rights violation cases, Supreme Court has original jurisdiction. But can you not also approach the High Court if your fundamental rights have been violated? Yes. You can approach the High Court under Article 226 of the Constitution. So when it comes to fundamental rights violation cases, Supreme Court has the original jurisdiction, but Supreme Court does not have the exclusive jurisdiction. Because this is not the exclusive power of the Supreme Court, because other courts, high courts, can also hear these rights violation cases. So this is original jurisdiction. But sir, which are those cases which can be heard and determined only by the Supreme Court and no other court can hear such a case? For example, if you want to challenge, what do you want to challenge? You want to challenge the election of President of India and the Vice President. You can file a case only and only in the Supreme Court of India. If there is a federal dispute, what is a federal dispute? Dispute between Kerala and the central government. Kerala is saying, my lord, central government has forced us that they are not allowing us to raise money, borrow more money. So we have a dispute with the central government. Where can you file such a case? Only in the Supreme Court. Under Article 131 of the Constitution. If there is a dispute between Punjab and Haryana, dispute between one state and the other state, dispute between a state and the center, all these are federal disputes, and such federal disputes can be heard and determined only and only by the Supreme Court. So on these federal related cases, Supreme Court has the exclusive jurisdiction. So first power that Supreme Court has is what we call original jurisdiction. Second is writ jurisdiction, which we have discussed in the rights chapter, where if your fundamental rights are violated, you can approach the court will issue various writs, and through these writs, your fundamental rights will be protected. Third is appellate jurisdiction. As the name suggests, Supreme Court can hear appeals. Appeal in the sense, a fast bowler bowling at 160 kilometers an hour. The batsman, whether he has nicked or not, we don't know, but the umpire raises the finger. The umpire is the High Court. But suddenly you go for decision review system, which is the highest appeal that you can go, because after that there is nobody. After that you can only pray to God, what happened to me? You can complain, but after that you have nothing. That's the Supreme Court. So Supreme Court is the highest court of appeal. So if High Court has given a verdict and you are not satisfied with that verdict, you can approach the Supreme Court, but only if High Court gives a certificate saying this particular case is fit for an appeal, because this particular case involves an important interpretation of the law, maybe involves an interpretation of the Constitution, and as such is fit to be heard by the Supreme Court. So take the certificate and approach the Supreme Court. Which means normally cases die at the High Court level, because the cases will go from subordinate courts to district courts to High Courts, and this is where the cases end. If you're not satisfied with the judgment of the High Court, you can approach the Supreme Court, file an appeal before the Supreme Court, only if the High Court certifies that this particular case involves interpretation of the law, involves interpretation of the Constitution, and as such is fit to be heard by the Supreme Court. Without the certificate, you cannot approach the Supreme Court. Now I can assume you have a question on your mind. Sir, what if High Court refuses to give the certificate? What will happen in that case? Even then you can approach the Supreme Court, and that is something that we call SLP. Although not mentioned here, special leave petition. That's what is mentioned here. Of course, the Supreme Court holds the powers to decide whether to admit appeals even when the appeal is not allowed by the High Court. And Supreme Court will accept your appeal if it is satisfied with whatever arguments you are putting forward before the Supreme Court. And that is what we call special leave petition. So one power, jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, original, then writ, then appellate, then advisory. Under Article 143 of the Constitution, we say Supreme Court is the advisor of the President of India. President can refer any matter to the Supreme Court, asking the views of the Supreme Court on this matter. But when the Supreme Court gives an advice, there are two things. One, if President refers any matter to the Supreme Court asking the views of the Supreme Court on this matter, it is not mandatory for Supreme Court to give an advice. Second, whatever advice is given by the Supreme Court, it is not binding on the President. It is not binding on the government. Sir, then what is this? First, you say advisory jurisdiction, that Supreme Court acts as the advisor of the President of India. President can refer any matter to the Supreme Court asking the views of the Supreme Court on that matter. And then you are saying it is not binding on the Supreme Court to give an advice. Then you are saying even if the advice is given, it is not binding on the government. Then what is the logic of all of this? It serves two purposes. Purpose number one, it allows government to seek legal opinion before it can take action on that matter. For example, the central government wants to gift a part of its territory to another country. For example, if central government takes this decision and gifts this part of this country to another country, then what if after that there is a case before the court, and then we will be embarrassed? So instead of matters going to the court later, let's go to the court first instance and ask the opinion of the court on this matter. Can we gift a part of our territory to another country or not? Can we do this by an executive decision, or do we need to amend the constitution? How? So the purpose of this advisory jurisdiction is you get to seek legal opinion on a matter before you can decide that matter. And second, the government can then make suitable changes. For example, in 2012, 122 2G licenses were cancelled by the Supreme Court. Then advisory jurisdiction was invoked. President referred this matter to the Supreme Court. Now you tell us, how do we go about selling this spectrum, 2G spectrum? The Supreme Court gave the advice that you should not go for first come first serve basis, you should go for an auction. Because at that time, Dr. Manmohan Singh's government had followed the policy called first come first serve. Whoever comes for the first time will buy the spectrum and then go. It's not like we have spectrum, we will auction it, whoever bids the highest price, we will give the spectrum to that individual. So the government followed a policy called first come first serve. And the Supreme Court in its advisory jurisdiction said you should go for auction, not first come first serve. Which means next time the government suitably made changes to its policy and said now we will follow auction route to sell the spectrum. This is the purpose of advisory jurisdiction. Then there is something else. Although this term is not mentioned here, revisory jurisdiction. And what is this revisory jurisdiction? Read this highlighted paragraph. Decisions made by the Supreme Court are binding on all other courts within the territory of India, because the Supreme Court is the top seat of justice. Orders passed by it are enforceable throughout the length and breadth of the country. If the Supreme Court says that this particular policy of the government is unconstitutional, that doesn't mean it is unconstitutional only in Delhi where Supreme Court sits. It is unconstitutional throughout the length and breadth of the country. If the Supreme Court mandates that in every state, whoever makes hate speeches, cases have to be registered, that does not mean it will be enforceable only in some states and not in the rest of the country. It has to be enforced throughout the country. Which means that decisions of the Supreme Court are binding throughout the country, but if there is one institution on which it is not binding, it is the Supreme Court itself. Because if its decisions were binding on Supreme Court itself, then how can I rectify my mistake if I have committed a mistake? So Supreme Court has the power that it can review its own decision. And that is what we call the revisory jurisdiction. What is this revisory jurisdiction? For example, less than a month ago, a decision was taken by the Supreme Court in Devender Singh versus State of Punjab, where Supreme Court said there should be sub-classification of SCs and STs. A review petition was filed, asking the Supreme Court, please review your decision. and Supreme Court is hearing this matter, and once Supreme Court hears this matter, you will have to convince the court that you were wrong in giving this judgment. And if you are convincing the court, court will revise its judgment, review its judgment and give a different judgment. That's what we call the revisory jurisdiction. And such a petition, which is asking the court to review its decision, is known as a review petition. To tell you further, although not mentioned in NCERT, even if this review petition is dismissed, you can file another review petition, and that another review petition is known as curative petition. But we will not go too deep into this, although relevant for exam, but not within the scope of NCERT series, because we are covering basics. Now check your progress. Dispute between State of Bihar and Union of India will be heard by, this is an original jurisdiction and will be heard by the Supreme Court. Isn't it? Very good. Appeal from the District Court of Haryana will go to High Court. Single integrated judiciary. We don't have dual Supreme Courts unlike United States, because there they have dual constitution. States have their own constitution, center has its own constitution. In India we have a single constitution and an integrated judiciary. Single constitution. And declaring a law as unconstitutional, that is what we call judicial review. And to understand judicial review, let's enter into a fascinating discussion on judicial activism, public interest litigation, and judicial review. Have you heard of this term, public interest litigation? Have you heard of this concept, judicial activism? These concepts have revolutionized the way our judiciary is functioning. How? Listen to me carefully. If you are my enrolled student, for example, my governance batch is coming up from the 4th of October. Then after that, I will be teaching polity in the morning batch. And let's say you approach me, sir, you are not covering important judgments of the Supreme Court. You are going too fast in your lectures. I will ask you, what is your enrollment number? You will tell me, sir, but I have not enrolled in your class. Then I will reply that you don't have any jurisdiction to tell me this. Why? Because you are not my student. Similarly, there is a concept called locus standi. If your rights have been violated, you should approach the court. Any Tom, Dick and Harry cannot approach the court on your behalf. If they do, for example, they will approach the court. Or for that matter, you are the individual who is approaching me saying, sir, you are not covering the important judgments of the court. And you are not teaching clearly. I'll say who you are. I'll ask you who you are. You say, sir, my friend is studying with you. I say, why are you becoming his mama? If he has any issue, he should come to me and say. And I will not hesitate in changing my direction. But who are you? You don't have any locus standi here. You are not connected to this case. You are not a party to this case. If your friend will directly tell me that, sir, I have a problem with your teaching, I will agree, I will accept, I will make amends. But who are you? You are not connected with this case. I am not going to listen to you. Now your rights have been violated. For example, your shelter has been snatched. Your livelihood has been snatched. Your right to life has been snatched. Or for that matter, we can say that your pension has been stopped. Or you are a street vendor and government has thrown away your items. Now, any Tom, Dick and Harry who is not related to you in any case approaches the court and says, sir, we are on behalf of this person. The court will dismiss this petition saying who you are. Let the person whose rights have been violated approach us. That's what we call locus standi. Whose rights have been violated, the person who is an aggrieved individual, only he should approach the court. But this concept underwent a change in around 1979. How? Listen to me carefully. The year was 1979. Newspapers published reports. And these newspaper reports spoke of the plight of under trials in Bihar jails. Now, who is an under trial? For example, you are accused of committing a crime for which you are under arrest and now you are in jail. Sunny Deol said, Tariq pe Tariq, but your Tariq also is not coming. Which means you are not guilty yet because you are innocent until proven guilty. But your case is not coming up for hearing. Which means you are an under trial. You are not convicted. You are still accused. But you are in jail. Because you are a poor person, how will you get bail bond? Because to get bail, to secure bail for yourself, you have to submit bail bond of various thousand lakhs of rupees as well, depending upon case to case. So without bail, you are languishing in the jail. Newspaper reports submitted the plight of these under trials, saying some of them have spent more time in the jail as an under trial than they would have spent if they were convicted. Sir, what are you saying? For example, I am accused of a crime X for which the maximum punishment is 3 years. And I am an under trial in Bihar jail. That means the case has not yet been heard. I am still innocent, still an accused. And I have been languishing in Bihar jail as an under trial for 5 years or 6 years or 7 years. Which means, my God, number one, what if I was innocent? Even these years that I have spent violated my dignity. But forget about it. Even if I was guilty, maximum punishment could have been 3 years. But I have served double the time as an under trial. This was mentioned in the newspaper reports. And one good soul, Kapila Hingorani, her portrait is there in the Supreme Court now. She unfortunately died a couple of years ago. Kapila Hingorani, she was a lawyer. She approached the Supreme Court and said, my lord, I have a case. I am not fighting this case on behalf of my client. I am filing this case on behalf of all these under trials in Bihar. That means I don't have any locus standi. I am not connected to this case. Nobody has approached me to file this case. Still I am filing a case on their behalf. I am a publicly spirited individual. I am here for a larger public good. And do you know what the court said? The court did not ask her what is your locus standi. The court accepted this petition, and this petition came to be known as public interest litigation. That means for the larger public interest, somebody is approaching the court, even if this somebody is not directly related to that case. And after this judgment, 40,000 under trials were released from different jails of India. And this case came to be known as Hussain Ara Khatun versus Bihar. And this is what we call public interest litigation. Another instance, a prisoner in Delhi, in Tihar jail, he was tortured. And what he did, he scribbled a note and sent this note via somebody to Justice V.R. Krishna Iyer, who was the judge of the Supreme Court. Justice V.R. Krishna Iyer looked at this letter and converted that letter into a petition and said, this is public interest litigation. Otherwise, you have to hire a lawyer and advocate on record, then you have to get your case listed, the registry has to take note of it, date will be given, then the matter will go to the court, lots of complexities. But this time, one letter by a jail inmate who was tortured inside the Tihar jail, he sent a letter to the justice, and justice converted into a petition saying this is public interest litigation. And sometimes the courts take matters suo motu. Without somebody approaching the court takes up the matter. For example, the rape and murder that happened at the Car Hospital in Kolkata. The Supreme Court took the matter suo motu on its own. Public interest litigation. And it is this public interest litigation through which our fundamental rights have been expanded. Expanded in the sense, for example, there is Article 21, which only said right to life and personal liberty. Through various public interest litigations, Supreme Court has said right to life means right to live with dignity, right to shelter, right to livelihood, right against adverse effects of climate change. So these fundamental rights have got expanded because of the advent of public interest litigation. And do you know the beauty of this? Before public interest litigation, who were the people approaching the court? Who were the clientele of the courts? Wealthy zamindars, top corporates, politicians, bureaucrats. But now the clientele before the court are the street vendors, are the construction workers, are the marginalized, underprivileged sections of the society, because their cases are taken up by NGOs, non-governmental organizations. And non-governmental organizations approach the court on behalf of these marginalized communities. And the court is not asking these NGOs who you are, what is your locus standi, because they are filing this case on behalf of the larger public. For example, you might have heard of Association for Democratic Reforms. In 2024, finally, Supreme Court gave a judgment saying electoral bonds are unconstitutional. That was on the basis of the PIL filed by Association for Democratic Reforms. So, expansion of the scope of fundamental rights, particularly Article 21, Article 14, Article 19(1)(a) has been made possible because of PIL. But NCERT says there is a negative side to it as well. And what is that negative side? It overburdens the judiciary. Now, previously also there were crores of cases pending before the courts, and now with PIL there is further addition to the burden. But somehow I don't agree with this criticism. It's like you have to do your job, and now you are given one more task, and you are saying, no, you are overburdening me. That's your job. So if people's rights have been violated, for that they need to approach the court. How can you say that you have burdened me further by filing these cases? By that logic, stop hearing all the cases. Then there is no burden at all. But yes, there is one negative side, that important cases, they take a back seat because precedence is given to these public interest litigations. Also, important criticism is that through this judicial activism, the lines get blurred between the executive and the legislature. I have told you previously as well that there is something called separation of powers. This theory is attributed to French philosopher Montesquieu, who says that executive should have its own area of influence, legislature should have its own role and responsibility, judiciary should have its own role and responsibility. All these different organs should be working in their own domain. One should not encroach the domain of the other. One should not usurp the power of the other. But it seems through this judicial activism, it is the judiciary which seems to be encroaching into the domain of executive and legislature. How? In one case, although not mentioned in NCERT, there was a terrorist attack on a shrine in Srinagar called the Hazrat Bal operation. Then these militants took the devotees hostage inside the shrine. And then the army made a decision that we will stop sending food inside the shrine because we were sending food to these hostages. Now we will stop sending this food. Why? Because this is a military decision that we are taking. Because this food is consumed by these terrorists as well. That is how they get the energy. We want to tire them out and then we will storm the shrine. Matter went to the Supreme Court on a public interest litigation. And Supreme Court said 1200 calorific values of food should be given to hostages every single day, which led to the then army chief remarking that Supreme Court is interfering in an ongoing military operation. That is not the job of the judiciary. This is a military operation. Don't get involved there. In one instance, Supreme Court is asking, parking fee is imposed in Delhi because there is lack of parking space in Delhi. But that's the job of the administration. You stay away from it. In other case, it is invoking or sending guidelines to resolve monkey menace in Delhi. But that's an administrative matter. That's the job of the administration, not you. Separation of powers. In one case, Supreme Court said effort should be made to interlink rivers. Such a technical matter that even technical experts are shocked or surprised at this. Through this public interest litigation, through this concept of judicial activism, where judiciary is becoming an activist. Because what is the role of an activist? The role of an activist is to pressurize an institution to lay down a policy, to lay down a program. Now, instead of executive laying down a policy, it is the judiciary which is laying down a policy. 122 2G licenses were cancelled. Supreme Court said you should have followed auction, not first come, first serve. My dear, that's the job of the executive. If that policy is wrong, let the people punish them in the elections. But you can't be doing administrative things because that would violate separation of powers. And in one instance, Supreme Court laid down what? Guidelines to prevent the menace of ragging in institutions. You might say, yes, that is good, but that's the job of the legislature to lay down rules, to lay down laws. And this has led to what some people allege: judicial legislation. Although these two terms, it's an oxymoron, judiciary and legislature, these are separate terms. But judiciary, laying down rules, it's like legislating on behalf of the legislature, which means judiciary is practicing this role of the activist to encroach into the domain of executive and the legislature. But coming towards the end of this lecture, judiciary and rights. We've already seen that judiciary is entrusted with the task of protecting the rights of individuals. The Constitution provides two ways in which Supreme Court can remedy the violation of the rights. What is remedy number one? First, you can approach the court. if your fundamental rights are violated. Courts will issue various writs. And you can approach not only Supreme Court under Article 32, you can approach the High Court under Article 226 as well. Further, any law, if it violates fundamental rights, can be declared unconstitutional by the judiciary. Where is it mentioned? Article 13 of the Constitution. Article 13, Clause 2 explicitly states, the state shall not pass any law to delete, modify, abridge fundamental rights. And if the state does this, then that law shall be declared unconstitutional. And this is where we come across this term called judicial review, the most important power of the court. And what is judicial review? Supreme Court reviewing the laws passed by the Parliament, not just Supreme Court, judiciary reviewing the laws passed by the legislature and the actions of the executive. That's what we call judicial review. But do you know judicial review as a power is not explicitly mentioned anywhere in the Constitution? Yet we can trace this concept. Where can we trace this concept? By looking at Article 32 and 226. Isn't this judicial review? That somebody has been arbitrarily arrested, you approach the court, court will see whether the arrest is justified or unjustified and will order the release if the arrest is unjustified. What is this? Review. The court is reviewing the action of the executive, whether this person has been legally, lawfully arrested or not. A law has been passed by the Parliament, which seems to be violating fundamental rights. Matter will go to the court. Wasn't electoral bond scheme challenged before the court because it violates fundamental rights? Isn't Citizenship Amendment Act being challenged in the court because the allegation is that it violates fundamental rights? And the court can use Article 13 to strike down that law, and that is what we call judicial review. Interesting point is here. What's the significance of public interest litigation? Do you remember that in the chapter Rights, we mentioned right against exploitation? Did I tell you there that there were construction workers who were brought in from different parts of the country to work in the Asian Games villages, who were paid less than the minimum wages? They were made to work in inhuman conditions. Did I tell you or not? Yes. But can such people approach the court? Because one, there is lack of judicial literacy. Some people, most of the people, they are not aware of their rights. And even if they are aware of their rights, how can they hire a top-class lawyer to file their case in the court? Because it will consume a lot of money. In that case, who approached the court? One NGO. And that NGO approached the court on behalf of these marginalized communities. This would not have been possible without public interest litigation. But now there is a tussle between judiciary and parliament, or should we say tussle between judiciary and executive on one hand, and the tussle between judiciary and legislature on the other hand. What is this tussle? Judiciary has sometimes directly ordered agencies that you take up this case. For example, CBI is asked sometimes to directly take a case. Although CBI should be handed over a case by the executive, not by the judiciary, but judiciary is giving orders to the CBI. That's the tussle between executive and judiciary. Tussle also is on judicial appointments. Till 1993, executive had the final say on judicial appointments. This power of the executive has been snatched because of the emergence of the collegium system of judicial appointments. And for long, executive is trying to do something to get this control of appointing judges back to itself. And it has come to a point where judges are nominated by the collegium, but orders for their appointment is not issued by the executive. There is a tussle also going on between judiciary and legislature. Can Parliament amend the Constitution? The answer is yes. Why? Because nowhere in the Constitution is it mentioned that Parliament cannot amend the Constitution. If there is a power given to the Parliament by the Constitution, can anybody snatch that power? No. So if you plainly read the Constitution, nowhere is it mentioned that Parliament does not have the power to amend the Constitution. But what Supreme Court said in 1973 in Keshavananda Bharati case, that yes, Parliament can amend the Constitution, but without altering basic structure. But what is this basic structure? Number one, judicial innovation. This term basic structure is not mentioned anywhere in the Constitution. It has been innovated by the Supreme Court in Keshavananda Bharati case. Second, what all is part of the basic structure? That judiciary determines. So if judiciary is the interpreter of the Constitution, if judiciary has to uphold the Constitution, where is basic structure mentioned in the Constitution? Nowhere. So why can and how can you impose a limitation on the powers of the legislature in amending the Constitution? And let's suppose even if there is something called basic structure, but what constitutes basic structure? Judiciary gets to decide. Judiciary sometimes say rule of law is part of the basic structure, very good. Secularism is part of the basic structure, very good. Independence of judiciary is part of the basic structure, very good. Primacy of Chief Justice of India in judicial appointments, it is also part of the basic structure. That means any system of appointment that you create, which will not give veto to the Chief Justice of India, such a system violates basic structure. Who says this? Supreme Court. Protecting possibly their own territory. And this is what Aladi Krishnaswamy Iyer, member of the Constituent Assembly, spoke on the floor of the Constituent Assembly. He said, while there can be no two opinions on the need for the maintenance of judicial independence, it is also necessary to keep in view one important principle, that independence of judiciary should not lead to judiciary becoming a super legislature or super executive. And this is what former Finance Minister Mr. Arun Jaitley said. This is tyranny of unelected over the elected, because judges are not elected. And they impose tyranny over the elected people. And sometimes judiciary and legislature have a different conflict altogether. What is that conflict? I have told you previously, can Parliament direct the judiciary how to take up cases? On Mondays you take up election cases, on Tuesdays you take up land acquisition cases, on Thursdays you take up public interest litigations. Can legislature direct judiciary to do this? No. Why? Because you will have the power to regulate your own functioning. Similarly, Parliament has the power to regulate its own functioning. How the bills are to be taken up, how they are voted upon, that's within the domain of the legislature itself. Yesterday we discussed money bill. Constitution says, if a bill has been certified as a money bill by the Speaker, the decision of the Speaker shall be final. That means nobody can challenge the wisdom of the speaker in deciding a bill as a money bill. But speaker decided money bills, for example, Aadhaar, and Supreme Court accepted the petition that yes, we will decide whether speaker was right in classifying, certifying Aadhaar as a money bill or not. Whether Supreme Court is right or legislature is right, I am not getting into that. I am just highlighting issues. If judiciary has its own area of influence, legislature should also have its own area of influence. And the tussle is that sometimes legislators criticize the judges, although they are not meant to criticize judges inside the parliament. And on the other hand, judiciary is now encroaching into the domain of the legislature as well as executive. If, for example, a member of the parliament action is taken against a member of the parliament by the speaker, that you are suspended for the remainder of the session, can this suspended member go to the court and get protection from the court? Yes. But can reverse happen? If judges take action against a particular judge, can Parliament come into the picture and take the side of that judge and stop the courts from taking action against those judges? It doesn't happen. So this conflict between judiciary and executive, these issues indicate how delicate the balance between any two organs of the government is and how important it is for each organ of the government in a democracy to respect the authority of others. That's the end of this chapter, Judiciary. But now let's take up questions and let's see how many can answer these questions. This question was asked in 2019 prelims. With reference to the Constitution of India, prohibition or limitations or provisions contained in ordinary laws cannot act as prohibitions or limitations on the constitutional powers under Article 142. It could mean which of the following? Anyone who can answer this question? This question was asked in 2019, and I have flagged this question here to tell you that even if you would have read NCERT, you would not have been in a position to answer. That means NCERTs are not enough to prepare for Civil Services Exam. And the answer is, the Supreme Court of India is not constrained in the exercise of its powers by laws made by the Parliament. Under Article 142, Supreme Court can give any order so as to give complete justice. Complete justice. Complete justice in the sense, in one case, who has the power to remove a minister? Governor of a state, if it's a state minister. Who has the power to disqualify a member of the Legislative Assembly on account of defection? Speaker. What if the Speaker is not taking a decision and the Governor is not removing this minister who is a defector? This happened in case of Manipur. Supreme Court invoked Article 142 and dismissed that minister, saying you're dismissed. Why? Because we have to give complete justice. Because you have violated anti-defection law, Speaker is not taking any action, the Governor is not removing you. So we will remove you because we can issue any order so as to give complete justice. That's Article 142. Clear? This question was asked in 2024 prelims, and this is something that you can answer, I think. The power of the Supreme Court of India to decide disputes between centre and the states falls under its Nandita. Original jurisdiction means if the Supreme Court can hear a matter not through an appeal but directly. Exclusive means if only Supreme Court can hear a case. if only Supreme Court can hear such cases. For example, if there is a dispute between center and the state, it falls under the original jurisdiction. But we say this original jurisdiction is exclusive jurisdiction as well. Because can tomorrow dispute between Karnataka and Delhi be filed in Karnataka High Court? No. It can be filed only and only, which means exclusively, in the Supreme Court. An original jurisdiction would mean that a case is directly filed in the Supreme Court, not through High Court appeal, but directly. The power to increase the number of judges in the Supreme Court of India is vested in, this question was asked in 2017, this power to increase the judges in the Supreme Court is vested with the Parliament. In India, judicial review implies what? The power of the judiciary to pronounce upon the constitutionality of laws and executive orders, the power of the judiciary to question the wisdom of the laws enacted by the legislature, the power of the judiciary to review all the legislative enactments before they are assented. This is clearly wrong, because you cannot challenge a bill before the court. You can only challenge a law once it has been signed by the President of India. So before they are assented to the President, no. The power of judiciary to review its own judgment given earlier in similar or different cases. Yes, we also call it judicial review. We call it revisory jurisdiction. But here the question is asking, in India, judicial review implies what? So if D also can be an answer, B also can be an answer, A also can be an answer, what is the most likely answer? The most likely answer is A. Why? Because it is the power of the judiciary to pronounce upon whether the laws passed by the legislature are constitutional or not, whether the actions of the executive are constitutional or not. Sometimes judiciary does question the wisdom of laws enacted by the legislature, but that is only sometimes, not always. Otherwise, most of the times there is something called doctrine of constitutionality. Whenever a law is passed by the Parliament, it is sent to the President for approval, and if then this law is challenged before the court will assume that this law is constitutional. Just like in a criminal case, you are innocent. It is for the prosecution to prove that you are guilty. Similarly, if a law has been passed by the Parliament and it is challenged before the court, courts will assume that the law is constitutional. Why? Because it is passed by the people's representatives. It is for the petitioner to prove that the law is unconstitutional. So the best answer is A. And now towards the end, there are some mains questions, because some of the students yesterday said, "Sir, please also tell us some of the mains questions that have been asked from these topics." And all these mains topics, when you see on the screen, you will clearly get a sense that just by reading NCERTs, we will not be able to answer these questions. Critically examine the Supreme Court's judgment on National Judicial Appointments Commission Act 2014 with reference to appointment of judges in higher judiciary. This is not there in NCERT. What was held in the Kolo case? In this context, can you say judicial review is of the key importance amongst the basic features of the Constitution? And what is this Kolo case? Not mentioned in NCERT. Starting from inventing the basic structure doctrine, the judiciary has played a highly proactive role in ensuring that India develops into a thriving democracy. In light of the statement, evaluate the role played by judicial activism in achieving the ideals of democracy. You can write answer by reading NCERT, but it won't be a sufficient answer, because for every answer you have to give current examples. That's about it. We will meet again tomorrow at 6 o'clock in the evening, and we will discuss another important NCERT chapter. If you have understood whatever we discussed today, do let me know in the comment section once the live stream is over. After that, you can go through the comment section and post your doubts post your feedback, and I'll see you tomorrow, 6 o'clock in the evening. Till then, have a great time. All the best. Good night.